This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Lauren Lester, the voice of Robin and Nightwing.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review.
Hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com.
And on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 325 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our social media pages, it's Liam. Liam, we have just wrapped up an exciting 5-week month of August where we covered nothing that has to do with the actual DCAU, but instead talked about the latest incarnation of Batman, that being the Batman Caped Crusader Amazon streaming service. We reviewed the first 4 episodes of that series, and then last week we dropped a little bonus episode for the 5th Saturday just to discuss a general overview of the show, but we are stepping away from that for the time being. We will get back to covering those, the rest of that series at some point in the not too distant future, I would assume. But for the month of September, as we kick off here, we are back home where it all began, where it all started once again with Batman, the animated series. Not only, of course, starting this very podcast, but of course, where the DCAU itself started. And we are continuing with the final 4 episodes of the original Batman the Animated Series run. Wow. It's just going to be an emotional month, I feel like. But we have an exciting one today, and we're not alone for this week either. It's a pretty exciting one.
That's right. Coming up in just a few minutes here, we're going to hear from the episode that we're talking about today, Lockup. We will hear from that episode's director, Dan Riba, friend of the show. Great to have Dan back on. We'll get all his thoughts on kind of all of the inner workings of the visual side of the episode. So can't wait to discuss this episode. An episode which I don't know if anyone who's watched it or you, Cal, noticed. There are some themes in this episode, aren't there?
Yes, I would dare say there was a bit of a commentary that was had by the writer Paul Dini, perhaps some of the visuals as well. Yeah, it's very interesting. We get into that with Dan also, so we don't want to spoil all of that. But for those of you who say that I want to keep, social commentary out of my comic book movies or TV shows or comic books, because they've never been that way. Perhaps you should just, go back in history and check that out. So, but yeah, we will discuss all of those things here in just a moment, all of the themes included. But of course, before we do that, we'll get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower today and subscribe. And not only can you get every single one of our podcast episodes in a YouTube video format, you will also get additional podcasts, all for the same price of $3.99. That's right. You get a wonderful podcast from the guys at Tim Talk. They reviewed the entire DCAU themselves, so their entire library is there as well. And the ongoing series from the folks at Watchtower Database, Jump on the Bat-Wagon, as well as their Intergang interview series, also all available on that same channel with our podcast. How awesome is that? Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower today and subscribe.
Yeah, that's right. So this was the synopsis for Lockup, which was written by Paul Dini with Marty Eisenberg and Robert Skur on teleplay, directed by Dan Riba, music by Christopher Carter and Brian Longsbard, and animation by Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. A disgraced fanatical warder of Arkham Asylum sets himself up as a vigilante jailer.
No. Nope.
We're back. We're back, everybody.
We're so back. Oh man, IMDb synopsis. How I've missed your poor English structure, as well as making up words and really not including the true plot details. Thank you for that wonderful, terrible synopsis, IMDb. Let's do our best, Liam, here to straighten it out ourselves a little bit here as we kick things off with Batman and Robin entering Arkham Asylum with the Scarecrow in tow. And it's interesting because we learn very quickly here that the Scarecrow himself is scared, and it doesn't seem that he's afraid of Batman in this instance, or Robin. It's in fact, he's afraid to go back to Arkham. As we hear, he's trembling in fear. Batman and Robin are met sort of at the door of Arkham by this hulking figure of a man that we learn to be the new Arkham security chief. Very, very important here. He's a security chief. He's not a police officer. He's not a deputized member of the law. He's just a security chief of Arkham Asylum. And but he's a hulking figure, as we mentioned, a very intimidating presence. And he grabs Dr. Crane by the lapels, pulling him in. Dr. Crane, again, exclaiming that the only reason he was escaping was not to go back to crime, but to escape this Bolton character.
Look at me, Batman. I'm shaking with fear. Me, the Scarecrow. I wasn't even going back to crime this time. I just had to get away from him.
I'll take it from here, Batman. Lyle Bolton, Chief of Security. Congratulations, Professor Crane. You're the first inmate to escape Arkham under my charge. You're also the last. I won't let you and the people of Gotham City down again, Batman.
That Bolton's a 10 on the creepometer, but it seems like he's doing a good job keeping the inmates in check.
Maybe too good.
We hear a couple of days later that there's a hearing discussing perhaps some of the concerns of the inmates, and there's a board review which includes Bruce Wayne. We also have Commissioner Gordon, Mayor Hill, and Dr. Bartholomew all on this panel as they're addressing some claims by many of the inmates. Sitting down first is one Harley Quinn, or Dr. Harleen Quinzel, if you will, and they're asking and kind of poking and prodding and asking her to share any thoughts or concerns they have about Mr. Bolton's leadership. She says that she has none, and even once she's poked and prodded a little bit further by Dr. Bartholomew, seems to be irritated, yelling and screaming that she has no issues at all. Next up on the stand is one Arnold Wesker and Scarface joining him, who are also asked about their thoughts and opinions. And while it appears that the ventriloquist is going to speak up and say something, Scarface butts in and says that there's no problems at all, everything's fine and dandy, and that ends their time on the stand. Last but not least is one Jonathan Crane, who steps up, and he's been sitting there for at least 10 minutes, as they mention, without having said anything. And as they continue to poke and prod, he says that nothing is wrong, that he's going to keep quiet. And it seems that Bruce notices, despite their lack of sharing of information, that there must be something more here. So he takes this opportunity to sort of beat the beehive a little bit, maybe rattle the cage a little bit to see if anything happens. And when he suggests that extending Lyle Bolton's contract for another 18 months, and it does its job.
Well then, based on today's testimony, I propose extending Mr. Bolton's contract for an additional 18 months.
No, you can't. You don't know what he's doing to us. Shut up. Don't listen to Jerkface here. He don't know what he's saying.
No, it's all true. If we don't speak up now, we'll never get another chance. He threatens us, takes away our privileges, even when we're good.
We've heard enough of this nonsense.
He says scum like us must be kept in line. That's why he chains us down at night and electrifies our doors. He held me over a can filled with termites. You hear me? Termites!
He's an animal!
A monster! Keep him away!
Shut up! All of you!
Talking about all the different tortures that Mr. Bolton has put them each through, electrifying bars, chaining them up at night, and of course, holding Scarface over a can of termites.
Incredible.
We'll talk a little bit about that later when we get to voice acting, of course, and with the director Dan Riba as well. But we learned from this that this sort of also lights the fire under Lyle Bolton, who is immediately perturbed and lunges at several of our inmates. So it got the end result that Bruce was looking for here. He really was hoping to stir up any potential issues here, and they don't call him the world's greatest detective for no reason,
That's right. He manages to, while not revealing anything about his alter ego, manages to trip Lyle Bolton by knocking over a chair in front of him, which allows the orderlies of Arkham to finally subdue him and drag him out of the room as he yells and screams about how all of these inmates deserve to be beaten within an inch of their lives. And he says that he realizes now that it's not just the inmates that are the problem in Gotham, it's the feckless bureaucrats and unwilling police officers that are the problem, and that all of them need to be thrown into a cage without a key. So from there, we cut to Lyle Bolton being unsummariously escorted out of Arkham Asylum, where the local media is waiting to ask him questions. And he tells them that the city is a wound. Every line this guy says sounds like a Frank Miller line.
I was going to say, every time it's either something that he would say or Rorschach would say in The Watch.
Yes.
Either way, it's like I actually had to Google it. I was like, is this a line that they borrowed from one of the other? I wasn't able to find one, but yes, you're absolutely right.
Yes, but it's a festering wound that needs to be stitched, which we then cut to Bolton sitting in his house, his giant house with just a small TV in the middle of a giant room. I think it's a funny little visual.
A completely normal man.
Yeah, super normal guy. He's upset at Summer Gleason's reporting on the matter, and after destroying his television, he realizes that while he may have this problem with the politicians and the doctors and the police, it all starts with and I'm quoting here, permissive liberal media. So we then cut to 6 months later. A lot of time jumps in this episode. 6 months later, Summer Gleason and Bruce Wayne are finishing up a dinner where they've just discussed a successful merger between Bruce Wayne's company and another unnamed company. Is this where the LexCorp partnership starts? Can we just headcanon that real quick?
I was gonna say I kind of thought so. Like it would make sense based on the timeline of where we are in this show, and we know the new Batman Adventures is shortly here on the horizon. And I guess we would have to go back and review when the new Batman Adventures crossover with Superman the Animated Series takes place. But I don't see that there's any evidence that would suggest it's not. So seems to me canon until proven otherwise.
That's right. So that's one of our latest headcanonings there. But yes, as Bruce and Summer Gleason discuss things, Bruce says that the maitre d' comes running out of the restaurant and tells Bruce that he has a phone call, and Summer Gleason in the meantime goes and gets in her car and quickly notices that the doors seem to have locked on her. She's not able to get out. The hand crank window, there's a dated thing. The hand crank for the window also breaks off in her hand, so she's stuck seemingly in her car. And then we see a giant sort of truck coming with these giant mechanical arms pulling her entire car into this back of this truck. Bruce Wayne in the meantime sees this and attempts to intervene, but a giant mechanical lock is thrown onto the revolving door. So thankfully, Bruce has this briefcase, which has not only a Batman costume in it, but a quick change smoke screen. And he is able to. So he sets off a smoke bomb in the middle of this restaurant and emerges as Batman and is able to get outside. He has a brief encounter with the now fully suited up Lockup, who tells Batman that they're on the same side, and that he says that Batman can catch the criminals and that he'll lock them up. Batman, of course, not really feeling that, but as he tries to intervene, a police car comes driving up, which Lockup throws a nightstick at their windshield, and it just causes them to freak out, and they go swerving, almost hit Batman, and then swerve into the restaurant. And as Batman goes to tend to the police, Lockup escapes with Summer Gleason. So we cut back to the Batcave here, where Batman and Robin are discussing the case.
This is Lyle Bolton's handiwork. No one configures a lock like him.
You mean this lockup nut is the security creep from Arkham?
Without a doubt.
Another fine villain made possible by a grant from the Wayne Foundation. Only kidding.
Bolton's last known address. See what you can find.
Batman gives Robin an address to check out, Lyle Bolton's last known address. We see Robin going and checking and finding not much there except for a shipping container with a specific ship's, I don't know what you call that, the designation, like their dock designation. So, and while Robin is checking that out, Batman returns to Arkham Asylum to check on Dr. Bartholomew. He sees that a security guard has been knocked out, and he goes to check, but Bartholomew has already been taken. At which point he sees the bat signal. It's just like calamity of kidnappings here. He sees the bat signal as he arrives at police headquarters, he finds out that it's actually Bullock that lit the light, who's been handcuffed to a pipe because the commissioner has been taken as well. So they sort of regroup because they realize the only person left to take at this point is Mayor Hill. They try to increase the police presence, and in fact, even Robin and Batman are there to try to protect him. But he goes with the old tried and true smoke bomb down the chimney strategy, in the confusion, Lockup is able to nab the mayor as well. And as Batman and Robin run out to try to give chase in the Batmobile, he's also put one of those like tire lock things that they put on your car if they're going to tow it.
A boot.
Yeah, a boot. Thank you. So they are stuck there, and now Lockup has seemingly captured all of his various foes that he has decided he had. He has the liberal media, he has the mayor, he has the doctor, and he has the police commissioner, and he's keeping them all on this giant decommissioned warship. And thankfully, based on Robin's investigation earlier, Batman and Robin know exactly where to head for this big climactic confrontation with Lockup.
Still nothing.
Just as I suspected from the rust. A high salt content, like seawater.
Hey, what if F-84 is the serial number of a ship? Bingo.
The Halsey was used as a temporary prison while Stonegate was being built. Computer, name of security chief during Operation Stonegate.
Well, blow me down.
We talk a little bit about that with Dan, but Robin actually gets to be the detective a little bit on this episode. But he puts two and two together and suggests that maybe the F-84 that they saw was a ship designation. So they jump in the Batboat and they arrive on the ship. And as they arrive there, Batman designates Robin to go take out the ship's security while he goes off to try and find Bolton himself. We quickly learn that the ship has been armed to the gills with brand new technology. It's including a giant cannon that almost takes out Batman, and a camera with like these tentacle locks or something. It looks very much like something that Brainiac uses later on against Superman,
Yes.
but it's maybe it's Brainiac technology that he's borrowing here.
I also question how. So he ties Robin up in these things, and Robin's escape is to throw a grenade at the security camera that is watching him get tied up, and that somehow it blows up the camera, which also disables. I mean, that's a wiring issue, right? like if the camera and the giant tentacles are tied up to the same fuse, that's really a wiring mistake, I think, on Lockup's part.
Yeah, some security expert, am I right? Like, Yeah, very, very video gamey. You just blow up the camera and everything. But yes, so Robin is able to escape, and he makes his way down to the ship's hull as he discovers the rest of the captured allies of Batman there. And Batman himself makes his way to the ship's control room and confronts Bolton for the first time since seeing him at the during the fight over when he was capturing Summer Gleason. They have a bit of a fisticuffs that throwing each other around in the ship's control room, which allows, of course, someone to be thrown into the ship's control, which forces it to start moving forward with no one behind the wheel to navigate the giant vessel. It runs aground on some rocks. This causes a giant hole to be ripped into the ship's hull, causing the ship to begin taking on water and begin sinking. This is all while Robin, while being able to open up the actual prison cells, he's not yet been able to free the prisoners as they're also chained to the wall inside. So he has to go in and manually try and pull everybody out and disable their cuffs. As he's doing so, the hull is continuing to fill up with water. Meanwhile, Batman and Lockup continue their battle outside of the ship's hull at this point. Lockup falls a great deal, seemingly like he's going to die, but luckily there was a life raft there to break his fall, which allows him to continue his assault on Batman. Batman is in pursuit, and they continue to have both a verbal and physical fight on the ship's hull. Lockup really laying it on thick here, saying that he thought that he and Batman were exactly the same. They could have created their own order.
We could have rid Gotham of the fools in City Hall and the police department. We could have made our own order.
I was born to fight your brand of order.
If that's your decision.
Batman, of course, says that it's his job to fight this type of order, and it appears that Lockup gets the upper hand as he's able to push Batman off the ledge, landing on now the almost capsized boat. We have a sort of a Titanic situation here, where the top of or the one side of the boat is completely sunk, and so they're fighting on the very tip top, which is really the side of the boat. Essentially, Batman is knocked over and lands on the rudder, almost incapacitated completely. Lockup pushing his face towards some of the giant propellers that are underneath of it, nearly decapitating Batman. Batman throws some mud in his face and is able to thwart him and kind of get under his skin, which causes Lockup to punch Batman mercilessly in the head. And just as he's got Batman handcuffed and about to kick him into the water, Robin bursts the door open to allow the escaped prisoners out, sees him, and Batman, as he's pushed over the ledge, grabs Bolton's foot, and the two of them tumble towards the water, much to Robin's surprise and fear. Both he and Gordon looking over the edge of the rudder, and just when all seems lost, a grappling hook shoots out of the water, lands on the rudder, and Batman emerges with holding a incapacitated Lockup by his shoulder pads. And Robin exclaims, I gotta teach him. I keep asking him to teach me that trick, but he hasn't done so just yet. Then we get a bit of a postscript as we see Bolton being led through Arkham, the rest of the Arkham Asylum inmates that we previously saw, Harley and specifically Dr. Crane, jeering, laughing, talking about how he's now going to experience fear here in Arkham.
Now you shall learn new lessons in fear.
They thought they could trap me in a world of lunatics, but I showed them. Now I can keep an eye on everyone. They'll never slip past me again.
But it appears that Lockup is actually quite content and pleased with his new assignment as he's led to his own cell, saying that he can now watch and keep an eye on all of them, and no crazies will be able to sneak past them. And that's with a parting shot of his eyes darting in and around the little slot for his inmate door. That's where we wrap the episode. So, Liam, thoughts on the episode, plot? As we mentioned, there is a commentary here, and we talk a lot about that with Dan, so we won't go into full talk here about it right now, but it's a commentary on police brutality specifically. We talk about in a second that they couldn't really use police officers, and that was a big thing, so they used the security, inmate security instead.
Yeah, I think if anything, in addition to the police brutality commentary, which we'll certainly talk about, as you said, in a moment, it's also, I think, maybe a more recent talking point is the, brutality in the prison systems in this country, especially. Also very relevant to this, and the way that people view, are we punishing people? Are we actually trying to rehabilitate people when we send them through this system, or are we just locking them away in a cage without a key and treating them like animals? Right. And again, it's not an easy question. It's not an easy, and there's no easy solution. Sure. So the fact that they touch on that, that part almost feels a little bit ahead of its time, because I think that's a much more common talking point in more modern politics. But the brutality thing, to your point, that's been going on as long as police have existed, as long as these systems have existed. So it is interesting to look at something that, yes, is now almost exactly 30 years old, touching on things that feel so relevant to present day. I think it takes an interesting look at that. Obviously, like you said, it's over the top. It's a caricature to an extent. The guy having this, like, especially when they get to the third act and they're on a ship with like tentacle traps and and all this extra, kind of wacky extra security, and he's in a balaclava and he's got a chain he's whipping around. Like it obviously gets a little, it gets comic booky, which obviously this is a superhero show, so it makes sense. But yeah, it's certainly, I applaud the idea to take a look at something like this through the lens of a superhero show. What does brutality in the police or in the prison systems or asylum systems look like in a superhero world? I think it's interesting, and as we'll talk about more with Dan, it's also just a good way to draw a line in the sand between what this guy is doing and what Batman is, what Batman and Robin do. Yep. And Batman's speech, that he gives to Lockup about, the lack of compassion, the lack of a chance to be better, and how important that is to Batman, even with people like Scarecrow and Harley Quinn and whoever that have given him and given the city so much trouble. And the counter argument that Lockup represents, to an extent, of, yeah, but you're just letting these guys back out into the city and they're going to hurt even more people. And that is a real problem. Right. That, it doesn't have, again, a simple one size fits all solution, unfortunately. Yeah. So even though, yes, what Lockup is doing is taken to an absolute extreme, I think like many good villains, you see the nugget of his worldview and why he sees this as a problem. And yes, he's taken these horrific, violent, over-the-top, cruel tactics to try to remedy the problem, but he is attacking something that is a problem. And I do think that creates an interesting conflict for Batman to, like we said, sort of contrast, this is what I do, this is what I'm trying to do when I go out dressed like a bat every night, compared to what this guy is doing, just, kidnapping people and locking them in a cage. Yeah. So I think that's where this episode probably is the most interesting, and where it succeeds the most, I think.
Yeah, I think we touch on it a little bit in our talk with Dan here in a few minutes, but it really, that that era of when the show came out was right out of the post 80s. I think the popularity of the Punisher and the anti-hero, and that was really growing in that general time and space. And I think doing this to kind of set apart both then, and I think in some ways we've talked about it a lot recently, but the Reddit commentator on who Batman is and how he's just a soulless man that beats on, the criminally insane, and is, probably he himself should be in an Arkham Asylum versus, the criminals that he puts there. This is a bit of a commentary on that, because you have the speech, as you mentioned, that Batman gives, talking about how Lockup's perspective is that sort of Punisher view of violence. We're going to kill the bad guys. Death is all that they deserve. There's no chance at any sort of rehabilitation. There's no humanity in any of these people. We're just going to kill them. Like, they did something wrong. I'm the judge, jury, and executioner, right? Meanwhile, yeah. Batman, in his speech that he gives him, sort of differentiating himself from Lockup, is that Lockup's perspective is bringing justice without hope or compassion, which is what differentiates Batman from those Punisher, Ghost Rider, whatever anti-hero type of person that is just bringing violence for the purpose of retribution, versus allowing or seeing and having hope that the person that they're bringing in may one day change. And yeah, the flip side of that being, like, is there really any evidence that, and he's not used in this episode, but is there any evidence that the Joker would ever be rehabilitated or would ever change? The argument could be made that no, that guy maybe would be the exception. However, but then you have cases like, especially in this universe, Two-Face or Mr. Freeze or even Harley, where they have done terrible, bad things, but then there are opportunities when they're given opportunities to work on themselves, to be rehabilitated, they do their best. And there are opportunities where you kind of see that little glint of hope or change. Whereas if you had just handed down an execution because they're creating more chaos, then you're like, well, I don't know. So yeah, it is an interesting contrast between those styles. I think it's a commentary on the Batman character. It really defines the Batman character too. Why that whole Batman doesn't kill thing, which I think, again, modern day people know that that's a staple of Batman. And there are some people that roll their eyes and say, this is ridiculous. Like, why killing doesn't make him a bad person if he decides to kill. Like the Snyderverse people were like, well, it's okay if he kills them. Like, it's not that, doesn't mean that he's any less Batman. And it's like, well, it kind of does, because this is the defining feature of this Batman, is that he believes, or even if he doesn't emote it, the reason why he brings and serves justice in this way is because it gives them a chance at being better. And hopefully turning their lives around or changing. And we see that on a couple different levels and with different characters, those chances that you see, and you see the glint of hope, and Batman just refuses to give up. So yeah, overall, I think it's an interesting story. I personally wasn't terribly offended. I laughed at a couple of, the line about the liberal media is, I LOL'd. If you can't laugh at that, like, even if you are the staunchest of conservatives, like, it's just, like I said, it's a caricature. Like, you have to be able to laugh. Like, you have to be able to laugh at something like that. I giggled at it. I thought it was pretty funny. But yeah, I think the rest of the episode, there's not a ton of action beats, as we talk about with Dan. you have the culmination of the episode. Another episode where we end on a ship, by the way, our second ship climax in a couple of episodes here, as we had the Bane episode also on a ship. But I think overall it's an interesting episode. I think it does more to speak about the character of Batman. I also would like to see if there's a stopwatch for how much screen time Batman gets in this episode, because speaking of not a lot of Batman in this episode, very interesting, relevant to our last month of reviews. I ended up giving Plot, by the way, a 7 out of 10. I think it's a good episode. I think it's fine. I think it's more because it's less action heavy and more plot and story driven. You had to have some sort of interesting discussions, which I think happen, and I think there's just enough of Batman and Robin being detectives to make it interesting. So that's why I settled on a 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just 1 point higher with an 8 out of 10. I think the last act kind of makes it more interesting. Like I said, once you get into exploring how Batman views someone like Lockup, and how he has almost more contempt for what he is doing compared to like what the Scarecrow does. Right. I think that's really interesting. So I think the last act of the episode kind of saves it. But yeah, I just think it's interesting. Kind of takes us out of our norm. We get a lot of our sort of background ancillary players get used in this episode, like Mayor Hill and Summer Gleason, which I think is fun because they're usually just there for like a scene of exposition and then they're gone. So it's kind of fun getting them in a more active role in the episode. Gordon too. So yeah, I just think there's a lot of elements. I like Robin getting to be a little bit more of gets to kind of, they feel like partners in this episode. Like they both kind of break off to do different parts of the investigation and then come back together and kind of put the pieces together. I think that's a lot of fun. So yeah, there's some fun little notes in there amongst all of the, like we said, kind of over the top commentary on both the real life issues and, as you said, kind of the Image Comics 90s edgelord superhero characters that were abundant in that era. So yeah, overall, and pretty fun episode.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. So Dong Yang responsible for the animation this week. And I guess before we get into talking about it, we might as well do what we do so very often, and that is throw to ourselves in the past, because as we mentioned at the top here, we do indeed have special guest correspondent, Mr. Dan Riba, director of the episode, who is nice enough to join us and have quite a thorough discussion about this entire episode. We have a lot of fun with him kind of going on the ins and outs. We even kind of pitch and ask, if there was any plans for a follow-up to the lockup episode here. We talk about any other potential cameos that could have been made from other Arkham Asylum inmates. Lots of fun stuff here. So without further ado, Liam, we will throw it to ourselves in the past to talk to Dan Riba.
Thanks, us from the future. Here we are, as promised, Cal, with a very special guest correspondent today to talk about the episode that he directed. We are joined by none other than Dan Riba. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. Obviously, we've had your compadre Kevin Altieri on the show. We had you guys on together, but this is our first time having you on solo, and it's talking about an episode that is memorable for a lot of reasons, obviously. I think we'll get into that when we go through some of the questions here that we have about what you remember about the episode coming together. But either way, we're excited to talk to somebody who is so important and pivotal. You directed so much of the DCAU. I think we talked about it last time. You did everything except Zeta Project, right? Even though you technically got a credit one time for that, or it's on your IMDb page?
IMDb page, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So you ran the gamut as far as the DCAU is. So you're we're amongst DCAU royalty here.
Absolutely. So first off, we wanted to touch on, before we get to the episode itself, something I think you kind of mentioned in passing when we had you on last, which is that when you started on this series, you were a storyboard artist. You were working with the show already, but the transition from that to director was kind of a daunting task, especially in light of the fact that you were about to get married. So just can you tell us a little bit about kind of your mindset as that transition goes to taking on that additional responsibility?
What happened was that Dick Sebast left the series. Mm-hmm. I was called into Ann Lighting's office, and Kevin had already talked to her because I had directed a whole season of Alf and 65 episodes of Super Mario Brothers at Deke, but I was reluctant to direct on Batman because I knew how daunting the show was. And it intimidated me actually, but I couldn't not participate in the show. I had to be a part of it. So I didn't even put myself up as a director, even though I had more experience than Frank at that point, right, directing. But then when Dick left, there was a door open, and Kevin was like, "Oh, Dan's got this. He's got this." And so I get called into Ann's office, and they asked me, and I thought, well, they told me, look, you've got your board guys already. This is the deal. We'll support you in every way. I talked to Bruce, and I'd worked with Bruce for a year now doing character designs and occasional boards here and there on the show. So it was like, there was, I felt very supported.
Good.
And so it was a no-brainer at that point to take the job. And
the rest is history, right?
It was great. And I lucked out because the first episode I directed by myself was Blind as a Bat, and that one went pretty well. And so I asked the right questions when we started going with it, and I even had opinions and asked Alan, and he was very accommodating with my opinions, and I was like, wow, I really feel involved and heard and supported, and it was great. It was fantastic. So I'm like, yeah, this is it. But it was as much work as I feared.
I bet.
Dick's desk, he left with one show to lay out. The What is Reality was still in layout, and I being a character designer, I was like, I knew what these characters are supposed to look like, and I knew animation. I'd done some layout at Ruby Spears, and so there were a lot of revisions. So you weren't just doing board revisions and notes from networks and this and that, and Bruce's notes or the writer's notes, whatever. You were mostly immersed in correcting layouts, and it was like all night. Practically doing this stuff. So it was a lot of work juggling, and I juggled okay back then. So I mean, not with balls, but with actual work.
Sure. Right.
Plate spinning,
Yeah, of course.
And so it was, and it ended up really, really fun. So I was like, yeah, well, maybe, and I came up with like how the Riddler would separate. I did that in the layout, so that would help, so it was really,
that was a very trippy episode. So you got to have play fascinating physics.
Yeah. And I have and I really I didn't have anything to do with the board or anything earlier, but with that layout, there's a lot of responsibility, fixing the layouts. So it was a little tricky. And also, I was in the editing room, doing a lot of Dick's shows that he had left behind. So Robin's Reckoning came in, and right off the bat, Bruce is like, "Go on up, go to the editing room." And so I sat with the editors and did the first pass. And again, this was something that I had done at Deke, where we had to edit shows and crank them out. Alf was brutal in terms of the schedule. Deke was insane. Yeah. So it was like boot camp, And so this was a breeze schedule wise compared to that.
Well, that's good. Your previous works prepared you for what arguably is your most well-known work. People these days, I don't know. I think Alpha Animated Series is probably streaming on somebody's streaming platform.
It is. It's on Tubi now. Yes.
Oh, there you go. So somebody has the rights, but in the grand scheme of things, the work that took less was less strenuous, hopefully, ended up being much more a part of your legacy. So that's awesome. So we're talking about the episode Lockup today, and this is an interesting episode in the grand scheme of things. We're towards the end of the original Batman the Animated Series run in that Adventures of Batman and Robin era. So we're here to talk about that today. So our first question specifically about the episode is, what, if anything, to you stands out about this episode compared to a couple of those other episodes that you kind of just mentioned, as far as episodes that you worked on for this original BTAS run?
The idea of the anti-Batman, the Batman that's our Punisher, if you will, the most extreme version of a vigilante that goes out and the fact that the network would let us do it is really, really fun. So it makes basically commentary on police brutality, on vigilantism, on all sorts of things that are usually not touched in a children's series. So I was pretty lucky to get the show, and it was it was what can I say, ballsy for the network to let us do this, because and it still is a controversial show. People take it, like we're criticizing the police and and it's like, well, yeah, but it's not.
It's a very specific. It's very specific in the comments.
Yes.
At which I think I just rewatched it again yesterday just for a refresh, and some of the things that I think we noticed, or one of the things that I noticed was just. It's interesting because you think of Batman as a vigilante. So you're taking the commentary. It's like, well, aren't you criticizing Batman? But then you had to differentiate between who Batman is and this guy, like you said, the anti-Batman. And it's interesting because I think one of the favorite Reddit memes or Reddit topics is that Batman is a soulless, compassionless guy that's beating up on the mentally ill, right? That's people will say that, which, if you look at this episode, I feel like it walks that tightrope very well of being able to explain the difference between what Batman's thought process is. And yes, he has fisticuffs and violence with these people that are mentally ill. Right. But there comes a point where he has the compassion of no, I want to see them get better. We have to give them a chance to reform.
Exactly.
Which is not what Lockup is all about in this episode.
No, there's some people that get off on the punishing,
right?
And they just want to spank the bad guy,
right?
Or kill them,
right.
And we couldn't do that,
right?
So
I imagine not. If closed fists were a no, I imagine killing certain villains was probably off the table.
Right. But it's interesting how that we walk that tightrope of how much there's implications of torture. And we couldn't really be specific, so the ventriloquist sort of, he held me over termites.
That line, I lost it on that line. I'd forgotten about that one until I rewatched it yesterday. It's perfectly done.
Absolutely. It really was.
Do you remember who came up with that original Lockup design, and did it change much between that original design and what we saw?
It was Bruce. Okay. And it was his idea was doing sort of the anti-Batman, so that Batman has this part of his face exposed, and so the idea was to close everything off except for the eyes. Nice. And the idea is the eyes peeking out, like he's spying on us, like he is at the end. I mean, we echoed that. But the other thing was that there's Italian comic, Diabolique, there was a movie in the 60s, and Bruce is a big fan of the film, and those comics were kind of cool, and the character looks really neat, and that also, he has a very similar mask, so that also helped inform us of how to to do this character.
So. Was the choice, this is sort of based off of that design, because you can kind of still see his mouth moving under the mask. Right. Was that just a choice to kind of keep him more expressive and manic?
Yes.
posed against Batman. Like,
yeah. I mean, we just found like the character yelled so much and it's so vocal.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of just like a blank thing wouldn't have been as expressive.
Yeah.
And so that was like our our cheat for that.
Well, it works because there's plenty of scenes, as you mentioned, with the eyes where he just gets, you can see the full whites around the eyes, which to me is always the sign that there's like a little something off about him. And, and like in the couple of those scenes where his eyes get real big and expressive and he's like real excited about getting ready to choke out, or even that initial scene in Arkham where they're interviewing him and interviewing the inmates to try and figure out what type of brutality may be happening, and they zoom in on his eyes at first and then he just kind of normalizes as it's like, please express whatever complaints you have, express them. Right. Yeah.
That's so funny good. that what we call that in animation, when you can see all the whites of the eyes, and, we call that pinned eyes in drawing, and so I remember I was here when I first heard that. Oh, you pinned the eyes there. Oh, what? I did what? It's like, no, they have to touch a lid or they look crazy.
But sometimes you need them to look crazy, right?
Exactly.
Well, speaking of animation, as we mentioned, we've had Kevin on before. We've talked about a couple of different animation studios. Dong Yang, I think, is technically responsible or credited with the animation for this episode. And Kevin has never been afraid to talk about what he did or didn't like, which animation studios he did or didn't like.
Right.
Generally speaking, what are your thoughts? Were you happy with this episode in general, and then in general with the work that you had done with Dong Yang previously, and then maybe again in the future?
The thing with Dong Yang is that they're a really dependable studio. They gave us quality work, and it really depended on sort of their animation director and the crew, because they were a very large clearinghouse for animation. So they had A crews, B crews, and C crews, just like all the studios did. So you could get a phenomenal show and you could get an okay show. And so for the most part, we got pretty good shows. You know, they were never going to be the TMS caliber, but they did fine. They followed our X sheets and they followed our layouts and stuff. Although this show, I don't believe is laid out here. I don't know. I think they might have had the Japanese layout crew. I never saw layouts for Lockup. So,
interesting.
Sometimes we outsource the layouts, or at that point we might have been letting them. They had a crew doing them.
Wow.
So that was. That was the thing. This episode came out pretty well overall. I was pretty happy with it. So yeah. I mean, boy, it wasn't an ACOM.
Right.
That was the thing.
My goodness, thank God.
And I don't think Kevin ever got an ACOM show. So I don't think he doesn't have the right to complain.
I think he had some words about Sunrise, but yeah, I don't think we've ever talked to him about ACOM.
Yeah. Well, I would take any Sunrise over an ACOM. So, but we had some shows that, like, I believe Sunrise did, like, they did good. They very anime, very Japanese looking stuff, and so it was sort of atypical, and we had stuff there where I remember, like, Bruce didn't really like the animation, but everybody else did, because he just thought, no, it looks it's off model and it looks too Japanese, and it's like, oh, this is beautiful, and you're like, okay. Whereas TMS actually would nail the series style, and they just had a fluid quality that they just learned how to in between in a way that just made things look like it had more cells than it did. They're impeccable animators. So
tremendous. Yeah. The stark contrast, I feel like whenever, that's one of the things that we heavily discuss when we're doing our reviews is the animation, whoever the animation studio is, and a TMS versus anybody else. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. This is going to be a great, we're going to have very little complaints or critical things to say about this because it's a TMS show.
And I get nitpicky about some animation stuff where I notice hand acting. And I'm trying to figure out where the issue was, because the hand gestures were right, but there were maybe too many of them, and so, like, Harley's doing some stuff, and you're like, it just feels like maybe we should have held on that hand pose a little longer before we snap to the next one, or maybe it's anticipating the dialogue instead of actually hitting the line, because there's the boarding is great and it's actually hitting the acting, but somehow there's a slight disconnect between the animator, the storyboard artist and the animator, and I'm like, was that in the sheets? Or was that the animators over there just not understanding what the line is, and then just kind of like not quite, but it's fine, but it's not snapped. It's not perfect, and you're just like, you just want that little thing to just like snap, But that's nitpicky. The director nitpicks.
Of course. That's your prerogative. I was gonna say, I'm sure it's your baby, so you're sitting there watching it.
Yeah.
All right, and so one of the thoughts I think we kind of already touched on this, but was Bolton always like a security guard rather than a policeman in this script that you remember?
I'm pretty sure that it was always presented that way because we were never allowed to show bad cops. Dirty cops were forbidden by Fox.
Right.
So if we pitched the outline to them as a bad cop, then it would never have been allowed.
Right.
And the point was that he's incarcerating them. So it's like, well, it's like, it's a security guard that Arkham makes more sense in a way than just a regular, beat cop that's sick of having to drag guys in that get thrown out, that escape. It's like, no, it makes more sense this way.
It's also, I think, allows for a little bit more of what, as you mentioned, the inferred torture aspect, because if the cop brings them in, at that point, his job is done, right? He can maybe brutalize them a little bit on the way to the asylum, but they're trapped someplace. He has full reign. He's the director at that point. He has full reign of keeping track of him. That line about him electrifying the bars and all of that stuff.
Right.
You can kind of infer more psychological and physical torture at that point because of his position.
Exactly. And it's like, you're like, wow, where's the supervision in this place? I'm like, oh my gosh.
Dr. Bartholomew or whoever's running this place doing.
He's just sitting in his office, tapping his pencil in the back,
right.
I guess, or something.
By the way, hold on a second. No, that's his back. But I actually did the character design for him. I have because I found out who the actor was, and I was like, oh, he looks like this, and because I remember he was on L.A. Law at the time, and so I did a little caricature of him, and so it Bruce kind of tweaked it a tiny bit, but that's pretty much who he was.
Incredible.
So
I love that.
Yeah, so I kind of felt like, oh, I did that character design. It's like,
that's a neat little. I love that. That's pretty awesome. Speaking about specifically, we were just talking about the villains and their kind of role in this is they're the victim, obviously. So we get, Harley plays a role. Scarecrow obviously is probably the most memorable because he starts everything off and, really has the final laugh at the end of the episode when Bolton is finally amongst them.
But who has the final laugh?
Yeah. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Scarface and Ventriloquist really steal the show with the very little bit there that Scarface has. Do you remember, were there any other considerations of other villains or anything like that to be included with that group?
I don't think we could have afforded it, even if, and I think it's just, these recordings are expensive and you have so many character voice roles allowed.
Right.
So when you'll notice on some shows like Trial and stuff, how many characters are there but don't speak.
Right.
And it's like, there's a very set, we're really lucky when we get an Almost Got 'Em and even Trial had a lot.
Yeah.
But we just couldn't have everybody,
Of course. Yes.
And, so in this case, I think they were picked specifically for the punctuation of the script. Harley's always entertaining and she's always, and also like the idea of him like brutalizing a woman is just like, oh, come on, this it makes him seem really worse.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the Scarecrow, obviously the idea that a guy who's scaring the Scarecrow is like a wonderful contrast. It's great.
Absolutely.
One of the things, by the way, talking about animation, I noticed I noticed there's a thing that they do that is sort of stopped. That we don't do an animation anymore where we have characters blinking to keep them alive. They call it keep alive. And I noticed that while Scarface is like listening to he's blinking, and I'm like, why does the puppet need to be kept
He has
alive?
like a lever on his back that
and
is
it's like he's just like, and it's funny because it's like, yeah, the Scarface is more alive than Wesker is.
I think there's even the moment where like Arnold like puts up both of his hands and then like Scarface pops into frame, like somebody like live.
It's so good. It really does drive home that fact that he's a completely separate entity than Arnold himself. It's so good, and obviously it plays it for some great comedy punchlines in those little bits.
Oh, it is.
Oh, so good.
Now this is a really fun record, by the way. Bruce Weitz just knocked it out of the park. I was a huge fan of Hill Street Blues, and I thought he was fantastic. I don't know if you remember the Captain Freedom storyline in Hill Street Blues, but it was powerful. It was so great. It was their touch on the superhero genre a little bit, and it was really fun and tragic and just it was really cool. And he was so funny in it. So I knew we were going to get a good performance, but I remember there were chills. There were chills when he recorded some of those lines. We were just like, whoa! They all had goosebumps, and we're just like, yes, he nailed it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think because a lot of this episode, either in those opening scenes or what the scene I always think about is him sitting alone in this chair watching Summer Gleason talk about how. And you just see the rage sort of and you hear the rage and he getting more and more manic as it starts. Like he starts out with this kind of low growl and then builds to the big,
right. And it's funny because that was one of those things as a director, you help cast the board artists, and you kind of and that was the thing where it's like Ronnie Del Carmen boarded the first act. Mm-hmm. And so all of that marvelous acting between the characters and his intensity and that stuff where he's sitting in the chair and all the rage, that was Ronnie. And then Butch did the second act, which had a lot of the action stuff. And it's like, so he was really the king of the action. Mm. And then Brian Chin was like, he was really into like the ship. The mechanics of the ship was like really something that he was into, and he's a big World War II buff, and he just knows about all these. So he was helping us inform us on the carrier and on the ship that we were using, and so he helped get us reference and stuff on that, and so it was really like each person like had their expertise and their role, and it was really fun.
You assembled like the perfect team there. You had the
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
You already touched on it with Mr. Weitz's performance, but do you remember anything else about the recording process of the episode? I mean, obviously you have George Zunza, you have Arlene Sorkin, you have Henry Pollock in as the three villains, you have a lot of our regular guest cast too, with Bob Hastings and Robert Costanza. Like it must have been a packed room on that day.
It really was. It was a packed room, and it was. I just remember we had a really good time. It was really fun. We knew that the show would be memorable because the recording went so well. So they really nailed it. So
love that. So we kind of touched on it briefly, but this episode has some not so subtle commentary, as you mentioned at the beginning, about police brutality, a very specific type of police officer. It's not a critique on all of policing; it's a very specific type. So given those very overt themes, do you remember Fox having? I know we talked about it before we went on the air. You might have some notes someplace, but what do you remember about what Fox said, other than no dirty cops, as far as the direction of where this episode was going once the story kind of came together and the standards and practices kind of commentary on it?
I tell you, there were notes about, but oddly enough, it was mostly about violence. It was mostly about, Batman can't grab this, grab him by the throat. We can't have this. We can't, can we change this punch to this? They were all very specific violent issues as opposed to content. Because there was he screams about beating somebody within an inch of their life.
Yeah.
Which is a really ugly thing to say.
Right.
And Saturday Morning generally didn't let people talk like that.
Right.
We weren't allowed to say kill or
right.
You know?
Right.
You know, it's like, so, you know, this idea that, yeah, he's literally saying he's going to nearly kill them with,
right.
You know, beating.
Right.
Is like, yeah, we were still not allowed to show a punch to the face. We had to like punch the camera and white flash, you know, but that was actually more powerful.
Speaking of the inferred violence, there's in that final scene where Batman and Lockup are fighting on the rudder of the ship as it sinks. There's a shot where Batman is handcuffed up from behind, and you see Lockup's hand go up, and you don't see it connect, you hear it connect, but it's clearly a large blow to the back of the head. Right. And I just remember yesterday when I was watching this, I thought, ooh, that was brutal. Like that was, and if you had showed it, it might not have been as rough, because your mind fills in the blanks, right?
Fills in the blanks. Absolutely. That's what those white flashes help so much with that. And somehow they don't come off as jokey as like a bang and a pow like they used to do on the old Batman.
Absolutely.
Which is what they were doing, was really disguising the violence with that. You know, they were just making light of the violence on that old show, and they were just like putting those ouches and booms and oops to just kind of make light of it, but they're also covering it up.
Wow.
So
never thought about that before. That's pretty awesome.
You know, but we weren't making fun, you know.
Speaking of notes from the network that you may have gotten over the years, it's pretty famous that there was at a certain point a directive that was verified by the change of the name of the show, that Robin needed to be in pretty much every episode you guys produced in this sort of back few episodes you produced. Was that something? Did you have a strong opinion about that? Did you feel like that was handcuffing you guys at all at the time, or did you just kind of roll with it?
Largely, we rolled with it. It's fine. You know, I love Lauren. He gives a great performance. Kids like Robin.
Absolutely.
They like somebody for him to talk to, for Batman to talk to. And so, you know, yeah, we like the solitary stalker Batman who kind of goes out on, you know, the you know, it just it is cooler to just see Batman by himself. But we get it, you know. It's like it is ultimately a kid's show, and the idea of the teamwork, you know. I mean, I played Batman and Robin when I was a kid, so I get it. I understand. So I didn't really feel like, you know, any of the shows that I worked on were diminished anyway by having Robin included. You know, it's like Robin, the Riddler's Reform had some great conversations. You know, it's like Batman has to talk stuff out.
Yes, right.
And he just seems weird if he's just talking to himself all
right.
the time, you know. And so it's like it really kind of helps in some ways. So in this case, that's like, yeah, this was good, because I think having Robin and Batman, like, you know, talk it out helped illustrate, you know, what kind of a nut Lockup was.
I think Robin has the best episode in this or best line in this episode, which is another villain brought to you by the grant from the Wayne Foundation. Yes, that's a great line.
Right.
And then also, it's you see Batman kind of turn around like. So often I feel like he just ignores him, but that one's like, oh, that one stung. I mean, he got him on that one. And then I think also it just allows you, as far as, you know, staging the action for that final beat, Robin is able to go after and save the hostages, while you can kind of focus that mano-a-mano confrontation between Batman.
Exactly. It would have been awkward for Batman, you know, to have to like do both. So, you know, there would have been maybe some dead hostages, you know.
Yeah, that's true. It would have drowned. Summer Gleason would be no more if we didn't have Robin. This was not on our list, Dan, so this is kind of out of left field, but it just came to mind to me after I was watching the show. So when we have had Kevin on before, he has his he's a, you know, an aviation nut, loves old-timey airplanes and didn't like the Bat-Wing. This episode heavily features the Bat.
He's wrong. Because he thinks it's a spaceship, and I'm telling you, there are so many, you can tell now with all these drones going around and all these, I've seen planes that have all sorts of fans that are total VTOLs.
Absolutely.
And Batman would have had the technology to do that. So It's like, oh, it's a spaceship. It's not a spaceship. It's a Harrier. And it's like, I get what his concern is, but I've seen somebody build one, a radio controlled one, and it's like, yeah, but it works. But the Batboat, you're gonna
Batboat, yeah. So obviously this episode features the Batboat. It wasn't used as often as Batplane or Batwing or the Batmobile, but any thoughts on the style, the use of the Batboat? Like it, didn't like it?
I liked it okay. I mean, I honestly, I kind of liked the old TV show one with the big fin on the back,
right?
Which was a nod to the Batmobile from the comics that they never got a chance to do,
right?
When they got the Lincoln, the Futura, they were like, okay, well, this is it. We're not getting that fin,
right?
And so the Batboat was like, yeah, that was the version that had it. So that was like, I always loved that when I was a kid. So yeah, I don't think I had a big fin, but it's okay. It's all right. It's a good looking shit about it. It was fun. It was like, and it's streamlined, a submarine.
Yep. I would say it had to double as a sub, the Bat sub also. So
yeah. No, it was fine. It was fun.
Absolutely. And then as we begin to get towards the end here, just out of curiosity, did this character ever come up maybe when you were doing the new Batman adventures to bring him back ever, or that you remember?
No. And I kind of wish he had made a comeback.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm trying to think chronologically. Forgive me. My brain is not processing. Yeah. I believe Trial was before this, right? Or was it
correct? Yep.
Too bad, because it would have been interesting to have him show up in Trial.
Agreed. Yeah.
That's right. Trial was before this. But it's like, because we didn't have that many Arkham centric episodes, and Trial was sort of the ultimate one of those. So
right.
And I don't know if we ever felt like he should ever try to escape again, because he felt like he's done. He's happy. He's just watching everybody from behind the scenes, But it would have been cool to have had some kind of callback to have come back at some
I would say my immediate, could we have worked something out with him and Harvey as the judge in the new Batman Adventures or something? Is there something there maybe?
I know.
Just again, you're just getting into the nerd fantasy.
I know.
For me,
it's true, but it's just he was just such a striking character, and I guess it's just one of those things where it just fit this one episode
for sure.
And I don't think it was worth bringing him back for anything.
I mean, pretty soon we'll be talking about Deep Freeze, which is obviously an episode that Kevin directed that brought back a character who had this iconic episode much earlier in the series. And then it's like, I think that's always sort of a debate topic among fans is, was it ever worth it to bring him back after Heart of Ice or that kind of thing? And eventually what they do with him in the Sub-Zero movie and all that going forward. So it's always interesting. Maybe sometimes it is better to just, you made your piece of art. It went well.
Dan, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation, talking about cartoons from 30 plus years ago and taking time out of your schedule to do it with us. Obviously we're huge fans of your work, and we're truly honored that you would take some time to chat with us about an episode that is very interesting and 30 years later still means something.
Oh, thank you for having me, and it's my pleasure.
If you have the opportunity, go see Dan. I'm sure he'll be happy to sign some stuff, talk to you about some stuff, buy some artwork from him. He's got some incredible artwork there. So good to hear that you're out and about doing the Comic-Con circuit now, so people can have the opportunity to talk to you and let you know how much we appreciate your work in person.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Dan, for joining us. We will hopefully have you on again in the future. And, thanks for talking about Lockup today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Liam, awesome time with Dan. Great insight. I mean, every time we have a director on, it's fun, and we learn something new. Dan, just the kindest man. So very kind. We spent however long that was, 40 minutes to an hour with him, and it felt like we could have probably gone for another 40 minutes to an hour, and he would have been quite okay with that. Yeah, just a fun time, and as we mentioned, catch Dan. He's out doing shows across the country now. Check out his schedule, and anytime we see that he's on a show, we do our best to share it on our social media as well. But if you get the opportunity, go meet Dan, go talk to him. He will nerd out with you and talk about Batman the Animated Series, seemingly for as long as you'd like to, and buy some artwork. Doing some great. I mean, it's not often you get to get hand-drawn artwork from people that work on this show. So if you're looking to add one of those pieces to your collection, go see Dan at one of the many conventions that he's been doing, and pick yourself up a piece of artwork, and tell him the DCAU review sent you. Liam, I guess we can break down our scores here. Overall, I think there is some inconsistencies here. Batman looks a little off model at times, even from scene to scene. I think there's some, I don't know, some odd looks. They did that thing where the lighting on his face was kind of inconsistent. Also, there were like weird face highlights from scene to scene. So there was a little bit of inconsistency, especially towards the end. There's I think in that final scene, his ears grow. They're not quite like mid-90s Nightfall Batman ears, but they're pretty long in that final scene between him and Lockup on the ship. But there's just not a ton as far as action is concerned for the episode, as we talked about. It's more. It's certainly more plot and story driven than it is action driven. You have those couple of action beats with him kidnapping Summer Gleason. We have a little bit of fisticuffs there, and then you have ultimately the kind of the final battle at the end is where the most of the action takes place. But I think there's enough interesting things visually to keep you entertained. I think there's some really interesting stuff with the inmates that we talked about. Some of the comedy beats with that scene are really funny. But really our final scene is really where most of the action happens and most of the interesting stuff happens. And so it's not a ton, which led me to kind of give it a lower score than I would normally give a animation and visual. I think some of the inconsistencies between the character models also led to it. But I ended up giving animation visuals a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I was a couple points higher. I went out to an 8 out of 10. I do think the model inconsistency is a little distracting. But overall, I really like we talked about it at length. I really like the Lockup look, with like the chains and again, just feels like such an Image Comics character, which really fits with the tone of the episode. The thing where you can see his mouth move inside the mask is also that's always stood out to me as a really interesting visual choice. We obviously discussed that with Dan as well. So
what's interesting with that though is that in that initial scene where he's capturing Gleason, for 3/4 of that scene, they didn't do that. And then
it's like the act break. It's like he doesn't have it, and then we fade to black for the first commercial, and then when we come back, he has it now.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if that was somebody else did the storyboards or if that was just a change. They're like, all right, well now he's got more dialogue in this scene here, so and more of it takes place like you have that one POV shot where Batman's inside the truck with the car, kind of looking out. But yeah, it's very interesting that because in my mind's eye, he has it the entire episode, but then I remember those Skybox Batman, the Batman and Robin Adventures trading cards. There's a Lockup card that features one of the screen grabs from that initial sequence where he doesn't have the mouth. So I knew that, like, my brain was like, oh yeah, there is a part of this where he doesn't have the mouth for some reason. So yeah, very, very interesting change there with that, not being consistent throughout the entire episode.
Yeah, and then just my final visual note is that final shot where he's being loaded into his cell at Arkham, and they have sort of the slot in the door so he can look out, and it's the shadow that is cast by that with just the light peering in through the little slot in the door mirrors the mask where it's just his eye. You know, the eyes are just in the light while the rest of his face is in shadow. I think is a really, really cool visual note as well. So yeah, some cool visual tricks, even if there's a little bit of inconsistency, and just the whole shipwreck, like the animation and everything with the shipwreck, I think is really well done, and the propeller and all that stuff is pretty great. So some cool tricks pulled out.
There we go. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. And as you mentioned, Christopher Carter and Brian Langsbard responsible for the music for this episode. And of course, Mr. Carter, I think we're pretty well familiar with. I think Mr. Langsbard only worked on The Lion and the Unicorn outside of Lockup, as far as Batman the Animated Series episodes were concerned. But I think for me, the thing that stands out for me for the music, other than the Shirley Walker Batman theme, which comes in at a couple different points, which I love, even the culminates at the very end as Lockup is locked up. We have the, I guess, what amounts to the Lockup theme, which is a very militaristic. We have sort of a snare drum beat that comes in. It's what we get when the title card pops up at the beginning and then sort of plays throughout as we're kind of intro to Scarecrow being dragged into the asylum. It comes back later on as we get our debut of the in-costume look of Lockup as he's dragging Summer Gleason into or her car into the back of his giant police vehicle. And then it once again kind of returns once Batman and Lockup are fighting in the rain and the lightning on the ship. So you kind of get this sort of, it's a steady beat with snare drums, and it felt very militaristic and sort of like something that you would hear assigned to like an invasion in a cinematic, if you're watching a military invasion or something like that in a movie, which seems to line up. Obviously, this is a very militaristic type of guy here, as he's being portrayed. So I kind of think it lines up for the character. It doesn't have like a resounding, recurring melodic theme to it. It's strings and horns, of course, as was the case for most of, if not all of, the music for the show. But I just think that little bit of percussion kind of leads that to bring that kind of that theme home of military, police, authority type of vibe for the music there. So I really dug that, and I thought that kind of created a little bit of aura for the character and kind of gave him a little bit of a weight and intimidation factor in these interactions with Batman.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point there. Yeah, it isn't the hummable classic villain theme that we get with some of our main rogues, but I think it absolutely fits the tone of the episode. Don't have much to add there other than yes, I think the music once the ship starts to sink, when it kind of hits the rocks and you see it tear open, the music that kind of starts there, that has a great, like, it's like, I don't know, like an old school Calamity and like in an old movie or something, like the really dramatic strings and horns come in there. And I think that's a lot of fun. And the Shirley Walker theme coming in when it's sort of, the music kind of drops for a second, and then when the grappling hook shoots out of the water, the theme kind of pulls out real triumphant. I think is a great moment as well. So I ended up settling on a 7 out of 10 for my music score.
Yeah, I went for the same exact score myself. 7 out of 10. It's good. Again, I think it serves the purpose for what it needed to be. And there's certainly some memorable moments punctuated by the Shirley Walker Batman theme as well. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. Let's go ahead and talk about our list of voice actors and actresses. As we mentioned, several little cameos here from some series regulars. Almost, I would dare say, stealing the show. But of course, we also have the rest of our cast as well as our main antagonist for the episode, all worth noting. So let's talk about this week's voice cast.
Yeah, so a lot of regulars. Not a lot of them get a lot to do, but we do have Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon. We have Bobby Costanza as Harvey Bullock, Lloyd Buckner as Mayor Hill, Marie Devon as Summer Gleason, all in there, and then Richard Dysart returning as Dr. Bartholomew. So a lot of our background players get to appear in this episode. Crowded recording session, I imagine. And then, I think the most fun before we get our main heroes and our main villain is the other supervillain cameos we get in this episode. We have George Zunza as the ventriloquist in Scarface. Incredible. Henry Pollock II as Scarecrow, and of course, the late Arlene Sorkin as Harley Quinn. That sequence when they're on the panel is great. I mean, Henry Pollock gets a little bit more because he also is in the opening scene where he's sort of begging Batman and Robin not to turn him in because he doesn't want to go back to Arkham. And then the contrast, like you said, they're all sort of being very quiet and refusing to comment. And then, as you said, George Zunza as Scarface, just maximizing your minutes, as we like to say on this show. From the bit where Scarface cuts off the ventriloquist to say that Lyle Bolton's a stand-up guy.
Yep.
And then at the end there, when they finally start, the cat's out of the bag and they all kind of start ranting and raving about how terrible he is, and he hits him with the termites line. I think I cackled when both times when we watched this before we interviewed Dan, which was a couple months ago. Sorry to pull back, this isn't live, but and then again today when we rewatched it to do our full review, just laughed my butt off both times. Just a great little, bringing all of those guys and girls in for just, to be quick little day players and do this one little scene is so much fun.
Yeah, it's like I said, stole the show. Absolutely hilarious. That little bit. Even that brief little scene there. I think we talked about with Dan talking about potential, was there ever any consideration for other cameos or anything like that? And he mentioned that he didn't remember there being any, but also looking at the ones that they ended up choosing, it adds the perfect amount of like Paul Dini levity to this episode. You have this dark theme that comes over everything with police brutality and what all the themes that we've talked about thus far, and then you have this brief little scene where a man with a puppet is doing physical comedy and going over the top, talking about being threatened by a can of termites. Like you can't balance out the seriousness of this with a more perfect, like, brief bit of humor.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic bit of levity added in that sequence with all of them. And then, our main players here, we have Bruce Weitz as Lockup, who, of course, later on in real world history, we would hear as Bruno Mannheim in Superman the Animated Series, who we've already talked about several times on our show over the years. Really good. I know the one of the writers for the episode mentioned that Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver was like a big inspiration to the script, and it feels like that's definitely present in Mr. White's performance. Not that he's doing a Bobby De Niro impression, but that sense of this guy who's just so consumed by what he views the world to be, and he's just kind of has this bubbling fury and anger just barely under the surface. It's finally sort of exposed and starts coming out as the episode goes on. Like you get a really interesting performance out of him when he kind of seems like he's going to hold it all together in those first couple of scenes, and he's just kind of he's very sinister, but he's not yelling or screaming or anything. And then once the other villains start, calling him out, and then he just loses it, and he's just this ranting, raving, like lunatic. Really, really good work from Mr. Weitz there, I thought.
Yeah, that first little bit where he's very threatening when they're doing the interview with the scene we were just talking about, the interview with the inmates, where he starts off by saying, if anyone has any objections to my methods, and you feel like he's going to be very threatening, then he goes, please tell me. His face, his brow unfurrows, and he just, pretends to be this sweet, sweet little boy. And then the rest of the episode, he just becomes continually more unhinged and upset and angry, and with these sort of little tiny moments of like zen that he has, whether it's when he's briefly talking with the media outside, but then his speech talking about the gutless police, the mindless bureaucrats, and the coddling doctors as he's being held, being dragged out of that office, and I think we already talked about it briefly, but his speech back and forth on those two scenes, both when he's first introduced to Batman with the Summer Gleason scene where he's talking about how this is the new order of Gotham, this is how it's going to be, Batman will bring him in and he's going to do serve the punishment, serve the justice. And that's where Batman separates himself and says, nope, this isn't how this is going to work. And then they continue to have that verbal sparring that culminates on the ship. Where Batman really separates himself and says, like, we could have gotten rid of the police and the politicians and created our own new order. And Batman says, I fight against that order. That's not my kind of order. So, it's really good back and forth. He's very, again, we talked about, it's a caricature of that archetype type of character, but he does it in a way that sort of offsets the seriousness of the actions that the character himself is taking. So I think it's a fantastic performance. It's really, really good. And it's almost, I'm almost sad that we didn't get more of this character because it's so good, but also at the same time, maybe that one single episode was enough,
Yeah. We touched on that with Dan. I think of I don't know how, what would have worked. I think I threw out the what if he and Harvey as the judge teamed up or something. Maybe there's some sort of vigilante squad that you could have set up with him and some of the other people, like an anti-Bat family type group, maybe in the New Adventures season or something. But yeah, I would have. We're kind of working backward. It's one of those ones where you work backwards from, well, we just want to use the character again, and then we figure out why later. So yeah, I think it's a great one-off appearance, and probably is more special just because we don't get any more uses of this character on screen. I think he does pop up in some comic books here and there. Also, one of the other original BTAS characters who make it over to the main DC universe as well.
Yeah.
So a character that has a little bit of a lasting impact and in this show as well. But and then of course we have our main players, those being Lauren Lester as Robin, and of course the late Kevin Conroy as Batman. Again, I think as you said, Cal, they're not in it a ton because so much of the episode is told from Lockup's point of view, and then also I think because that second act is just so boom, 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 because you have to move from the Summer getting kidnapped, where they have this first initial meeting with Lockup, to, all right, Robin's investigating this, Batman's investigating this, now Dr. Bartholomew's taken, now Commissioner Gordon's taken, now Mayor Hill gets taken. So it's really kind of bang, bang. So there's not a lot for our heroes to do. I do like the scene in the Batcave that we talked about. Lauren Lester gets a couple funny lines in there about the grant from the Wayne Foundation. I think is an awesome line. I also like when they're about to go to the ship, he hits us with which this feels like a Paul Dini line, which is the Popeye reference. He's, well, blow me down. Yeah, I think he says when they're about to go on the ship, which I assume was not an accident. But Yeah, I mean, so Lauren Lester gets a little quipping to do, but I think the pièce de résistance we've already talked about when we covered plot, but Kevin Conroy getting to kind of deliver that speech to Lockup about his lack of compassion, his lack of hope, for his inmates, for how he treats people when he's the warden of this prison, and I was born to fight your kind of order, I think is that line kind of stands out as like that's an all-timer. Maybe that's a really good Batman line, again, especially because, as we've talked about, the episode is so starkly trying to draw a contrast between what Batman does and what a Lockup is doing here, or what a Punisher does.
No, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, that line is the culmination of the entire episode. Batman has repeatedly kind of heard that we're not all that different, you and I, type of comparison. And I can imagine as Lockup gets more and more violent, and obviously he's no longer targeting the same actual people committing crimes. Now he's going after, politicians and the police commissioner and people that are, in some cases, allies of Batman, all in the same name of the same sort of vigilante justice, and trying to claim that they're all under the same sort of flag there. And Batman's like, no, like this isn't, we're not the same. We're not even close. I actually fight against this type of thing. And the passion and the conviction in which the late Mr. Conroy delivered that line, I mean, it works so well with the music that comes, swelling underneath of it. But yeah, it comes from what feels like authenticity. So yeah, I love it. It's a great line from him. And as you said, he doesn't have a ton as far as impactful lines are concerned, but even, going back to that scene where he's able to sort of goad Lockup to kind of reveal his true nature in tripping up the both literally and metaphorically tripping him up in that scene with the other inmates. It's, the subtleties in which he was able to deliver some of those lines and kind of, reveal the true intentions of Bruce underneath of it. Just, man, there's a reason why we talk about him every opportunity we get to. But yeah, miss that guy, Kevin Conroy, really great voice actor. Can't say it, won't say it enough times, no matter how many episodes we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as much as we enjoyed being outside the DCAU for the last month or so, man, there's just things about the coming back to the, again, where it all started with this BTAS run, even this late into the show, the Adventures of Batman and Robin section of the series. It still hits really strong, and the voice acting is obviously no exception to why it still hits so well. So I ended up giving voice acting a very strong 9 out of 10.
Yep, same exact score here for me, 9 out of 10. It's really, really strong. Everybody involved. I think it certainly lays heavily on the back of our Lockup and Batman. But again, there's also a sort of contrast, not only in the styles of justice and the styles of who these characters are, but Batman, other than that line that he delivers where he's really emphasizing that they aren't the same, that he fights against that type of quote unquote justice or that type of law that Lockup is trying to instill. Batman is relatively like cool, calm, and collected for the majority of the episode. And as we mentioned, almost from the get-go, as soon as he's sort of revealed to be the abusive person that he is, Lockup is just more and more unhinged, and he kind of loses that calm nature that his voice sort of initially, although it has a bit of that unhinged undertone has in that initial scene, it just becomes more and more over the top. And, every line is seemingly yelled and, has that hint of irritation underneath of it. Whereas Batman is just really cool, calm, and collected until that final portion where he's just like, we are not the same. We're not ever going to be on the same team. We're not ever going to be on the same side. So yeah, speaks a lot to the performances from our voice actors. So unsurprisingly, really high scores from both of us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Liam, let's begin to total everything up here. So totaling everything up at the end of the day here with all of our scores, I end up with a 29 out of 40. What about you?
And I am a few points higher at a 32 out of 40.
All right. Rewatchability. We'd already talked about obviously culturally and real world implications for a lot of the commentary that's done here. Some, as you mentioned, more relevant now that maybe weren't as relevant then with, certain topics. But even with that aside, I think it's an interesting episode overall, seeing, as we've talked about, really defining the Batman character and those Reddit conversations of whether or not Batman is just running around beating on the mentally ill. I think it defines that. I think it really sets the Batman character aside. Now, if you miss this episode, does it really land a whole is there a big gaping hole in the DCAU if you don't watch the episode? No. So maybe I'd give it a 1 thumb up as far as rewatchability. It's fun. I think there's enough here to hold your interest, but if you skipped over it, it also wouldn't be the end of the world.
Yeah, I think one thumb up is good. I think it is. I think it's important, like you said, as far as a character study of Batman. Even though Batman's not the main focus of it, you study him by showing this more sort of overt, fascist type character to sort of contrast him with. So I think it does do something interesting that way. But as far as, inherently important to the rest of the show or to the rest of the DCAU, like we said, this is Lockup's only appearance. So, it's hard to say it's like one of the most important episodes or anything, but I think it's important enough to the series and does enough interesting things that it gets a 1 thumb up from me.
There we go. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap things up for this week. Don't forget, we would love your support for the podcast. If you joined us for the first time last month with our Batman Caped Crusader reviews and stuck around, thank you for doing so. As we did last month, we'll continue this month and continue to do so every episode. Ask for your support in some form or fashion. If you do like the podcast, you can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Apple or Spotify are the more popular ones we know of. You can leave 5-star reviews on both of those. And then, of course, on Apple Podcast, if you leave a 5-star review, it gives you an opportunity to leave a little blurb review for us. And Liam, we have, for the second time in the last couple of weeks, we have yet another 5-star review. And this one, no offense to everyone else, we love all of our 5-star reviews equally, but this one I particularly loved because of the time, effort, and DCAU references left by our latest 5-star review.
Absolutely. So this is from username Clark's Creek, and the tagline for it is "Am I Blue?" And then the substance of the review is, "Fortunately, not when I listened to the DCAU review." In parentheses, I'm trying to make up for the lack of rhyming in the DCAU's version of Etrigan. I found out about this podcast thanks to Watchtower Database. Hey, thanks, guys. And I'm super glad that I did. I really enjoyed listening as Cal and Liam assess each spotlighted DCAU episode by examining the individual aspects of plot, animation, music, and voice acting. I also appreciate that they extend their coverage beyond just the DCAU by applying their signature review style to episodes of non-Timverse DC animated series as well, especially Clark's Creek's favorite, The Batman. Whatever this mystery gift is that I'll be receiving for writing this review, I hope Cal and Liam are better gift givers than Mongol in For the Man Who Has Everything or Booster Gold in The Gift, and that I don't wind up with a Black Mercy on my birthday or with a twisted alternate reality before my wedding. Oh, that's a reference to a Tom King Batman story. All right. I didn't get that when I read this the first time. Anywho, thank you so much to Clark's Creek. You can reach out to us, as mentioned, through the Twitter /X DMs or through Instagram. Hit us up with your mailing address, and we'll drop you something as a little gift ski for leaving that review. And hey, someone else could get a gift next time if, in fact, they also leave us a 5-star review.
That's right. So that's your little encouragement there. Thank you to Clark's Creek for taking the time to leave such a nice, funny, and amusing, thorough review of the show. We appreciate that greatly. And then, of course, if you want to support the podcast in any other way, as we mentioned, you can follow us on social medias at DCAU Review on most social media platforms. Follow us there. Interact with us there. We do speak and do our best to interact with people regarding all things DC and DC animated universe. Lots of it's 30 plus years at this point of Batman the Animated Series debuting, and we're still getting collectibles and references in other cartoons and coloring books and things that are related to Batman the Animated Series. So lots of stuff to talk about on a daily, if not weekly basis for the DCAU and Batman the Animated Series. So joining the conversation there. You can also become a monthly supporter by checking out the show notes. There's a link directly there to join the other monthly supporters that we have, who we thank for donating monthly to help us to support the podcast monthly. And then, of course, you can also check out the store to pick up a piece of merchandise if you want to support the show that way. Liam, as we mentioned at the top of the program, we are continuing here the final countdown. Please cue the theme song and the dancing if you're a fan of Arrested Development. But it is the final countdown by Europe. And that means we are entering into number 3 of our final episodes of Batman the Animated Series, or at least the original Batman the Animated Series run here with another review next week.
That's right, and it'll be our final original BTAS Joker appearance as we hit the episode Make 'Em Laugh, which, I'll be honest, not one of my favorites, but not one I have seen in quite a few years, so perhaps that'll change when we look at it under a more thorough lens next week.
That's right. Can't wait to check that out with you then, Liam. It's going to be awesome. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.